Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is. Thank you for tuning in to Conversations with Dr. Don. For you first-time viewers out there, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals and about whatever it is we've decided to talk about. Tonight, the title of tonight's show is What's Important on January 9th, 2014, my first show of the new year. And my guest tonight is Jimmy Moglia, who's been on the show a number of times in the past because he's always intriguing and exciting to have on. He is about the brainiest human being I know of. Jimmy, thank you for coming on again.
Good heavens, no, thank you for the introduction. I don't think it's true, but I'm glad you said it. You know.
How are you feeling right now?
Not better than yesterday, and I hope not better than not worse than yesterday, and hope not better than tomorrow. So.
He started already, you see. I love him. Yeah, I'm good. I'm a little bit anxious because we had a little technical difficulties getting started, but we're going to be okay. We have enough time to get things in. And Jimmy is so full of stuff, good stuff. It's just marvelous. We should have 2 hours to do this show, but we only got 1 hour because there's so much that you're going to talk about that would be of interest to my viewers, I'm sure.
Let's hope so.
So let's go. You've been on maybe 3 or 4 times in the past, but my viewers will probably not have seen you in the earlier shows to know a little bit about you personally. So let's talk about you personally as though we haven't done the bio stuff. My shows typically have 2 major sections. The first part is the bio stuff, where we talk about who you are, Jimmy, and where you came from, and all kinds of other stuff. And then the second half of the show is the subject of the show, what's important. And January 9th, 2014. So, if I were to ask your best friend, Jimmy, who is Jimmy Moglia? What would your best friend say? Jimmy Moglia is, and the first person, tell me.
What they would say about me?
Yes, as though your best friend say it in the first person. Jimmy is.
We are the worst judge of ourselves, so I will be as objective and concise as possible.
I would expect that.
I don't have any specific strong ideologies or beliefs that I hand on to.
You started out by saying I. You're supposed to be talking about Jimmy as though.
They.
You should say Jimmy is.
Oh, Jimmy is. Jimmy is himself, and was born in Europe, in Italy. Grew up in a dual French and Italian speaking area. Went to school in Italy, and he studied Latin for 5 years, Greek for 5 years and Latin for 8. Whereupon he found out that...
Is that what happened to you?
Yeah, that's whereupon he discovered there were very few people, very few employers interested in dead languages. So he had to take a degree in engineering, and out of the degree in engineering came up an employment with a company that is now not what it used to be, a large company here in Portland. Out of that...
In Portland, Oregon?
In Portland, Oregon, not Portland, Maine. And then after that, he founded a computer company with no money at all. And this company he ran for about 20 years, and it became quite successful at one time.
20 years?
Yeah, and more actually, more than 20. Then in 2010, now the pronoun is becoming a little bit difficult, so allow me to revert to the personal singular present I. In 2010, I retired nominally or formally to dedicate myself to very curious activities, one of which was writing, and the other one was as important as the updating of my, quote, technical skills, unquote. Because when you run a company, you really don't have much time to dedicate at the end of the day or the night to upgrading, to keep up with the technical development and practice them. So these have been the 2 stages of my recent 3 years, now beginning of the 4th. However, they have not been entirely
What was
idle.
your company about?
I started the company with a little device, that enabled the users to save hundreds or thousands of dollars in their printing costs. It was a very simple electrical machine that rinked dot printer ribbons, dot printer cartridges, which now are in the Museum of Historical Technology. But at the time, that's all you had, those very noisy printers. And the cartridges were very expensive. So by having this device and was called dot matrix ink, which is a lubricate special type of ink, rather than paying $10, $20, $50 or $100, they spent 10 cents and they could reuse the cartridge a number of times. So they were the proverbial two birds with a stone, although would never do catch a bird with a stone. But anyway, they were able to save on cartridges, on printing costs, as well as doing their little bit to protect the ever degrading
people
environment.
Who bought this device. People who bought this. Yes.
Out of that came a number of other products. I would say about 5 or 6 product lines that were developed during the life of the company. But we would take too much time just to describe of that. So
Did you have any patents associated with this?
No, there were no patents associated with it because, again, talking about patents would again a long time.
Right.
But in essence,
sure.
The cost of a patent and the fighting for the protection of the patent would exceed any revenue that might occur by implementing the protection. So
sure.
That was my assessment anyway. Whether it's good or right or wrong, I don't know, but that was my assessment.
Mm-hmm. So. You mentioned your heritage, Italian and French.
Yes.
And you're multilingual.
I probably have said it before. Something tells me I said it before. I speak Spanish to God, French to men, Italian to women, and German to my horse. Except that
he's off and running.
Except that my German is not what it used to be, but it's not the fault of the horse. Too many Germans speak English, so.
Can we start again? Jimmy, you're precious. A religious preference, can I ask you about that?
I'm an extremely faithful practicing agnostic. Of course, coming from the continent where I come from, I grew up Catholic, and I have respect for all the religions.
Been there, done that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I have respect for all the religions and the religious beliefs, but I'm an agnostic. Actually, the best I would say statement on beliefs to me was made by Tom Paine in his book, the relatively short book, The Rights of Man.
The Rights of Man.
And
I
believe that if people in general were to read The Rights of Man, at least the first 10 pages or whatever, they would probably rethink about the religious beliefs. But that is how I would summarize it anyway.
So you were Catholic at one time, and now you're an agnostic.
Yes.
What will you be in the future?
A better agnostic.
And you touched on your formal education. You have a PhD, don't you?
Yes.
And how, did it hurt getting that?
It did and it didn't, because I have a certain personal addiction to uselessness. So during my student year, I became a musician. And so I spent, rather than finishing the normal canonic time required for, at least for the course, I took some time off, and I was exhibiting myself as, which is a good definition, exhibition, as a country and western singer on cruise ships in Europe. So I was able to do about 12 cruises, but there was a reason behind it. First of all, I do like the sound of country music more than anything else. I did like it. And secondly, it was a period of time when country western American singers in Europe were paid a lot of money. I was significantly cheaper, so I was a good investment for whoever employed me at the time. On the other hand, because I did so many cruises, it was good for nothing actually being paid. It was, I would say that it was pretty good.
Yeah. And the Thomas Paine, the title of that book is what?
The Rights of Man.
Yeah, I want to be sure. I'm a little embarrassed that I haven't read it yet.
It's not very long.
Okay.
But it is scathing denunciations of the proofs of divinity that normally are provided by the major churches, religions.
What was your PhD in?
Microwave engineering, which now the microwaves are past their prime, but still at the time it was the...
Did you ever apply for membership in Mensa?
No, I don't know what it is. I have heard the name, but...
The people who are super bright.
I am not.
An exclusive membership thing, they say this.
They will probably not accept me, because I was a poor student, and everything that I learned on my own, following my methods, which are very unorthodox. So, just as I am an agnostic, I am also agnostic in education and learning. So,
assessments of intelligence, huh?
I don't know. It's a sentence you left in midair. So, what do you mean?
Assessments of intelligence. In the West, we have ways of assessing a person's intelligence quotient. Their intelligence is a number figure we assign to them.
Yeah, which I think personally, that's an opinion, not a belief. It's an opinion that those intelligent tests really do not measure the intelligence. They measure the ability of whoever prepared the test to impose his points of view.
I love it. So in your retirement life, you have a number of ventures that are going on.
Yes.
And this is one of them?
Yes. The story, that's very short, very concise. As you know, I've written the book, Your Daily Shakespeare, and through a parallel to that book, I produce on this very studio, not this one, but the other one, previous one.
Your Daily Shakespeare, that's a monstrously thick tome.
Which was an arsenal of verbal weapons to drive your friends into action and your enemies into despair.
I've been to both places.
Which you've been. And out of that, however, there are the two main fathers of universal culture when it comes to literature. I think it's fair to say Shakespeare for England, for the English-speaking people, and Dante for the Latin-speaking people, and in particular for the Italian.
Shakespeare and Dante.
I call them the contemporaries of the future, insofar as the message which they convey through their writing and their poetry is of value now, as well as probably many centuries since both you and I won't be here, nor everybody here who's participating in the studio. So for this reason, they are contemporaries of the future. Anyway, having done that work for Dante, I started doing the same thing for the Divine Comedy, for Dante's Divine Comedy. And it just so happens that a European senator, senator of the European Union in Brussels, as you know,
yes,
got hold of the book before it was printed, and he, if I may say so, he brought it himself to a congress, to a political congress, and he told me that he found it very useful. So, which is used because this is not a question of vanity because I did it. All it is a dictionary of quotations in which the listing of the entry is not by chant or play or poem or sonnet in case of Shakespeare, but it is by situation. So in case of Shakespeare, there are over 10,400 situations that you can find yourself in. So through the analytical index.
In the Western literature?
No. In situation you can find yourself in life. You are arguing with your wife or with your accountant or with your friends or with your enemies. There are it's the best I can do, 10,400 situations. And each one of the situations points it to a quotation. And for a quotation, there is the quote, tips on how to use it and how to modify or maybe as well, and a reference to the context in which the original quotation appears in the play, poem, or the sonnet, or in this case, on a Divine Comedy. It is for this reason that he brought himself the book to the Congress in order that when he had a political adversary, he may find to say, also because Dante is used in, if you listen to a session in the Italian Parliament, which is a comedy by itself, but if you listen if you listen to it, every now and then somebody comes up, Dante would say, or he actually repeats some of the quotes from Dante. So
do you compile this into a volume?
Yes, this is what I did.
Shall we show it to the viewers?
That's okay. The translation is our daily Dante, 3,500 ways to get away with it with Dante. So that is it.
I'm glad you're not our president. That's terrific. That's terrific. So this is your latest. Now you have something going on now besides this.
Yes, my third book printer of this type is at the printer and in Italy, because out of this, one of the publisher whom I knew before, and he would be in itself a story because he lives in a medieval village with a beautiful place, but it's one of the most beautiful places in central Italy, and the history, how I found it would be a chapter by itself. Anyway, he proposed to me that I write a review of American history, and I said, well, there are too many. However, there may be some interest, especially in Europe or in Italy, about the perceptions of the American myth. So the book is a critique of the American myth, and the title of the book is translated, The United States of Amnesia.
The American myth. What is the American myth?
The American myth, again, we have to be concise here. The American myth was born a long time ago, and it was born at the time of the first constitutions. You know, the Article of Independence, then there is the Constitution, and 2 years after the constitutions, you had the French Revolution. Mm-hmm. And the American myth was born then as the supporting ideological foundation for anything that was good or that could be good for man, and that it was drove, in a sense, the spirit of the French Revolution. Now,
who created the American myth?
It was nobody in a sense, nobody created it, but the major indirect factor that created the American myth was the enormous distance at the time and between the United States and Europe. So says it's not Shakespeare, so distance lends enchantment to the view. So the distance between America and Europe made it such that you could project as an image, as a mirror. You can put the mirror in a faraway place at the time and project on it whatever you would like to see good on mankind. This had reflections all along, and it continues to, in a sense, to this day, although it is much, much attenuated.
What would be the opposite of the American myth? The American truth?
The American memory. This is why I call the United States of Amnesia, because if there were, I am not aware of the current syllabus in schools, but if it were more, I would say, accepted that a curriculum regarding on history should take into account a balanced view of what happened, then the American myth would be quickly exploded. But it is not.
So what happened in that historical period of time?
Yeah. Well, of course, there are macro phenomena that we all know, including the genocide of the native people. There is the question of the slavery, and so those are the major one. But
genocide of the red man in America.
There is the militaristic. The third one is the militaristic approach, whereupon you had the invasion of Mexico, which was something which was almost like the Vietnam War. The causes of war, the reputed causes of war, have always been attributed to the enemy. But the Mexican War is the 1848. It was something that was provoked by the United States. It was written in the books. They said, we want to arrive to California. And so they were able to invade Mexico and then pay them a pittance for 2,000 square miles of territory, which is pretty good. So militarism, slavery, and genocide. These are the three components that are usually forgotten, disregarded, or usually not particularly talked about.
Which is the counter to the American myth.
Which I was saying, if these aspects, or rather this contribution to history, they are bad, but they are a contribution to history, were taken into account, then the overall, I would say, perception may change across the people, or the populace, or the ground, or the masses everywhere. What gave me the idea of this book was, interestingly, a statement it has not made public very much that I know of, by the governor of Indiana. The governor of Indiana, who was a Republican at the time, when he came to know that the book of, which you know very well, the book of Howard Zinn, The People's History of the United States.
Phenomenal book, Howard Zinn,
which is a phenomenal
People's History of the United States.
When he came to know that it was in circulation in the universities of Indiana, and it was not in circulation in the secondary school, the University of Indiana, he became very incensed. And he goes, how can this, quote unquote, and the reason I say quote unquote, I would have to use a word that I will forbear to mention out of my inviolable respect for the ladies, but so how can this pile of this can be in these schools? And he did everything possible to eliminate it from the schools.
Yes.
And so that gave me, if you can call it, inspiration with the lowercase I.
So because it was a counter to the American myth.
Because that countered the American myth, yes.
Yeah. Which brings me, I'm going to take you away from what you're saying for a moment. I've been wanting to introduce one thought of mine that I wanted to talk about in our time together, classicide. I just learned what that means, and as you're talking about what the U.S. did to the Mexican peasants and what the Europeans did to the American Indians and what Joe Stalin did to certain Russian people and the Great Leap in China. And so there's homicide, suicide, and classicide. Is some of those things you're talking about fit into the idea of classicide? Is there indeed classicide going on in the world?
It is a different form of classicide. I would say yes. The answer is, generally speaking, yes. If you want to examine the problem more in detail, there are more subtle ways to kill a class, or rather to reduce a class to its lower values, of which we have evidence here too. So.
But I took you away from where you were going, and I always want to follow you. Shall we go back to my cheat sheet here?
Sure, sure.
Do you have a partner now, boyfriend, girlfriend? Wife,
I'd like to
husband, or what?
I was married. I'd like to ask for an exemption on this matter. I have two sons. Two sons that are grown up.
Yes. And how would you characterize your political persuasion? Are you left, right, or circular, or what, politically?
I would say I am secular in most of the things that I would. I follow social issues. So anyone who, in some way, attempts to make his or her contribution for a restructuring of society along more humane ways gets my, if not my vote, gets my sympathy. But so I'm certainly not. Today, as I see it, there is no political party that would fulfill these conditions as far as I can see it. So I would say I'm outside of the political sphere. Even if I were in, my contribution could be minuscule at best. So it's, at the moment, I think it's probably more advisable to see things from the outside, or things that you do, which is in your own way, you are promoting a different point of view, which is not only today, but with the programs that I follow with regularity.
Thank you very much. Social justice is the driving consideration for me. And these other terms, capitalism, socialism, communism, and liberal and all those sort of things fall by the wayside when I consider the bottom consideration being a humanist and a caring human being and following in the footsteps of Jesus, if I may, Jesus the man, not Jesus the God, Gandhi, or even Mandela, or Martin Luther King, and a few others.
Mandela number one, not Mandela number two, because there are two Mandelas, but anyway. The answer is yes, of course, social justice, except that I think it's time to take into account that it's not just a question of reducing the class differentials into the equation, as I and as many people, probably not a majority, or certainly a minority, as a minority of people are aware of. In the equation of social justice should be included consideration about the environment and the fact that we cannot expect, it would be stupid, irrational to expect to raise the whole level of the Earth population to the degree of quote-unquote wealth that normally we describe today as being what we should reach as social justice. We should not forget that the Earth increases, population has a net increase of 3 units per second. So every day there are 90,000 more people on the Earth. So that is what I meant to say. Social justice should be complemented by considerations about the environment.
Of course, about consideration of loving Gaia,
of loving
Mother
Gaia.
Earth, memberships in political, social, or civic organizations. Any memberships that come to mind for you?
No, I'm part of this Tuscan Association of Oregon. I've been for many years.
Will you say that again?
The Tuscan Association of Oregon. It invites people who have an interest in Tuscany or in Italy in general to participate to our meetings, which are of a cultural nature in the wider sense of the word, in the sense that we talk about history, we talk about art, occasionally we talk about cooking too. There's a mixture of everything.
And those people in this organization, are they anywhere like you, or they're as bright as you are? Or
they're better than I. They're better than me.
You lie, too. You lie. Well, the clock is ticking down, and it looks like we should stop talking about who you are and go to, after a break, go to the subject of what the show is about, what's important on January 9th in 2014, because we've got some notes here, and I'm just curious as to where we're going to go. And I'm going to suggest somehow to the powers that be that we go for 3 hours instead of 1 hour. Shall we take a break, Mr. Director? Yes, okay, we're back, and thanks for staying tuned. The second half is going to be a real treat for you. You get to experience Jimmy some more in a different context, which will hurt your head. For you viewers who missed the opening of the show, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of 1-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals, and Jimmy, my guest tonight, is unique, and about whatever it is we have decided to talk about in the second half of the show. I got a bit of a cheat sheet here of things we might talk about, and of course Jimmy has prepared enough material for 4 hours of work, but we'll see what we can cover.
There's a Latin sentence, I will say it in Latin because it's a few occasions. Better abundare quam deficere. It's better to abound than be short. So,
okay.
That's why. It doesn't mean that we have to go for 4 hours. Even hotels have to keep the health of the crew in mind.
So shall we start with your first consideration here, the First World War? You want to talk about 1914, the First World War?
But it's an interesting year insofar as there are a number of anniversaries. And the 3 anniversaries that are interesting, in my opinion, are not necessarily in this order, is the 30 years after 1984. 1984 was Orwell's 1984.
Yes.
2014. Then, of course, there is the 100 years of the First World War. And last but not least is the 40th anniversary of the War on Poverty, which, according to Johnson's Wars on Poverty, which has been recently criticized by a prominent and notorious Republican congressman. So the sum total of his speech and philosophies, the war on poverty has failed, therefore let's declare war on the poor. But
is that what he said?
Well, not exactly, but the equivalent of, because
can you name him?
Rubio, a guy by the name of Rubio. He's a hardcore from Florida. Yes, Marco Rubio, and. Well, he didn't as you know, in Orwellian spirit, in the 30th anniversary of the book, what you normally try, Orwellian spirit suggests that you say something by saying the opposite. So when I said the war on the poor, not exactly, he said, well, the solution, rather than increase the minimum wage, would be to assign the states to whatever funds are now available through the federal systems, as if people who are hungry in Mississippi were less hungry than people who are hungry in New York, so that each state would then decide what is the level of hunger that its poor citizens may have, so that they may be adequately fed through whatever.
So that Mississippi will provide the same amount of money per person that New York or California would.
There is not. Well, now you're asking me to go into details which I cannot really say conclusively. But the impression left from what I heard is that each state would decide according to their wisdom how to best administer these funds, which would then, it's easy to see how this will become a almost impractical system, because you would have minimum wage of $8 in one state and minimum wage of 15 in another, plus they would give some more money for food, less money for something else. I would say that the system, as far as it is concerned, I think it was a good idea then, and I think it is still a good idea now.
You use the words war on the poor. That's a pretty strong indictment or assessment. Is there a war on the poor going on right now in America?
It's not war not with weapons, but essentially with. I believe so. I believe it is. Yes, I believe it. There is a war on the poor, and of course this is a tremendous is a generalization which can be, any generalization can be destroyed or whatever, can be attacked from various points of view, but. Let's, as an example, which you may or may not agree with, and also is probably already known. You may have talked about it in one of your other shows. But let's take the case of the minorities. Okay, the minorities. The enormous progress was made in the 60s through people who have lost their lives, including Martin Luther King, of course, and Malcolm X and others. So as there's been a change in the wind, whereby I think we can call it the 1%. The 1% decided, okay, the wind tells us that we should be quote unquote integrated. So we will have a selected, according to whatever criteria, number of people belonging to the minority that will to whom we will assign positions of preeminence, and this will be adequate or will suffice to demonstrate that we have overcome the minority issue, the problem of racism. this is not my thought. There is a very interesting book. This the Anglo-Saxon Black. It's a bit aged now, but it really reflects in pretty good detail the attitude of the very selected minority community that has been integrated, quote unquote.
Condoleezza Rice, Clarence Thomas.
Clarence Thomas. There's a whole rostrum of people, quite long, and so it is the let me put it this way: the problem of the minority, of the racial disparity, has been converted into a brand, where the brand makes it appear as the problem is being resolved.
Yeah.
Obama is a brand. Maybe a brilliant people, no questions. But as far as the problem at large, he represents like the do you remember the Benetton, all the colors of Benetton or whatever, or the Rolex watch, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
So we have the brand established. Therefore, we have solved the problem, which is not.
So then the war on the poor, isn't that really a symptom of something else? The super rich, I don't think, decided, let's have a war on the poor. I think what seems to be a war on the poor is secondary to another motivation that they had. Perhaps it is because of their motivation to have more power and more money and more control over events and the world and how it functions. And secondarily, they can achieve this by reducing the ability of the poor to survive successfully.
Well, I think you're right. I don't think it is actually a declaration of war, as you would go war in Afghanistan or wherever you want to go. But there is an interesting shift, historical shift. I don't know whether anybody has yet written too much about it. But the historical shift is such as the 1% that we always talked about, as opposed to the 99%, is now
the Occupy
group is not a U.S. phenomenon; it's a worldwide phenomenon.
Yes.
Whereupon the 1%, the global 1%, has one philosophy, has one program, has one structure, has one mode of thought, and one program. So the program is concentrate, have as much as I can, to the detriment of everybody else. Some of the interesting, in my view, byproducts of this phenomenon of historical shift is that you find alliances in notorious places where you could possibly ever thought they were possible, in places where you would never have thought that such alliances were possible. For example, most of the satraps, for lack of a better word, the satraps in the Middle East, including Saudi Arabia, are now essentially allies of Israel. And how can you possibly that happen? It's impossible. But that is only a proof of the point. Well, of course, let's overcome
the same bottom line consideration that's most important to them.
So let's of course overlook that, according to the United States, Saudi Arabia is a democracy where women cannot drive, and people are decapitated, and don't commit adultery or else. So this is a phenomenon that I don't think has been dealt with too much, and that therefore is probably overlooked by the majority of the people who like to think about things. But it is a reality that should not be forgotten. So to go back to your point, yes, it is a phenomenon. It is not a war on the poor, but it's a war by deduction. Since if I am trying to accumulate as much as I want, somebody else will have to have what I'm accumulating more will be less for the others. So it is an indirect war on the poor, waged directly with direct means from the 1%, global 1%.
What do you and I and the ordinary citizenry need to do to overcome this war on the poor?
I wish I could be more optimistic, but the answer is nothing. Except what you're doing here is infinitely better than nothing, because that is the only thing that we can do now. It is, everybody knows that the control now, one of the anniversary there is an interesting one. The control now that we have of the individual is so total and global that whenever the 1% were to perceive even a minor threat to the quote-unquote the establishment, they would have means to destroy the individual. We have classic cases, and then I will want you to continue. But take one case. Now, when you go up on the plane from Portland and you go down the south, you can see these enormous clear cuts that you can see you cannot see from the ground because they leave on the roads. They leave some padding.
Yeah.
Until a few years ago, there were groups of what I call them courageous. That's the only adjective they can use. Courageous young people, those who chained themselves to trees.
Yeah.
In order to, where are they gone? They're gone because they were infiltrated by the FBI.
COINTELPRO.
And now.
Or the Stasi in the Soviet Union.
Oh, sure. And now they cannot even communicate with each other because the moment they do, they are nabbed and put in prison for long terms. So this is why I'm saying this is what you can do, what we can do.
Do you think that Snowden should be given the Nobel Peace Prize?
Of course. Except that I don't know about the developments here because we don't know. It's always amusing to speculate about the future because the case has been so notorious and there have been such tremendous pronouncement against him in the United States, where like he should be condemned to death. Somebody said that even in Congress or something very similar. It may end up that being such a case with time, because the 1% is pretty good at manipulating things, they may find the way to I would say, recycle him into the system and forget what happened before. Just in the same way as happened with Mandela. The parallel is not exactly accurate. But you say, we're all celebrating Mandela, but there have been two Mandelas. The one that they are celebrating now is Mandela number 2, not Mandela number 1.
Tell me about Mandela number 1.
Mandela number 1 is the one who was the symbol, incorporated the symbol of active fight for apartheid and equality.
Yes.
But at the moment that, what was the name, his Botha started serving tea, as when he pulled out of prison. At the moment he did that, for whatever reason that we will never know, Mandela changed his mind. So he said, you remember when he was going to Castro and say, come to South Africa, and he was embracing him as a brother, etc. Mm-hmm. They become a Thatcherite nation. His family has enriched himself considerably, which is fine, no problem with that. But so you have now
Mandela's family has enriched itself
significantly for this, and so, but which is fine. The problem, not the enrichment of Mandela, is the fact that they've given up on all the promises the ANC had. Yeah. The consequence that now the majority in South Africa are, at least from what we read, and it is difficult to see that it is probably true, are worse off than they were under the apartheid economically.
Did Mandela get what he could get?
Okay.
Did he compromise too much?
Here we come to the question. We can never, nobody, even the best historian with all the documents, can never fathom what goes through the mind of an individual, so we cannot say. So we can only judge by the results. But the results seems to have been the parallel of what has been the black Anglo-Saxon in the United States. The branding of a political,
black on the outside and white on the inside.
So I don't think I can answer the question.
Yeah, I can't either.
So,
which comes to mind now, talking about Mandela and the two Mandelas, I wonder which Mandela was a good friend of Gaddafi. Can we show Gaddafi here, this poster? Yeah, a world's unsung hero. His relationship with Gaddafi through the years has been incredible. They really loved each other.
Yes.
But which Mandela was in operation then?
Mandela number 1. The Mandela number 1. And the Mandela number 1 also being a big friend of Gaddafi, at least on the outside, until it was not disliked by the 1%.
But he didn't throw him under the bus.
I'm sorry?
He didn't throw Gaddafi under the bus.
Yeah, but there is something more that you can do. I don't South Africa never complained about the bombing of Libya, about the killing of Gaddafi. They never did. Now, we put Gaddafi on, but I've been in Iraq, I've worked in Iraq for a while, and Saddam Hussein is the is the mirror image of Gaddafi in that sense. Because I've seen in touch with my hands, I can say, yeah, this I saw. It was a very orderly society. There was no obvious poverty in the streets, universal health care, free education to universities. The women could go to university, I know because I met one. Very nice girl.
Iraq.
In Iraq.
Yes.
So these were the conditions that, according to the American administrations, because there were several involved, were conditions they had to be changed in order to bring democracy. So the answer to your question, to Gaddafi, parallels the same question that should be posed about Iraq and Saddam Hussein, because you can see now what is happening.
Talking about democracy, you mentioned that a number of times in the past few minutes. Which country in the world approximates a pure democracy or close to a real democratic system?
In its own way, first of all, democracy doesn't exist. Even the democracy of the Greeks was the democracy could, in my opinion, could only exist if the candidates were drawn by lottery, and that's the only way that it could exist.
You are a revolutionary.
Of course, but that would never happen. So, in I would say the country.
I never say never, Jimmy. Please, I shouldn't have interrupted you. I don't want to interrupt your thoughts.
No. I wish it happened, but
of course.
But the other, I would say Switzerland, but that's for very historical, unique reasons, and for conditions outside it that made it possible for this little, relatively speaking, small state to survive so prosperously and yet maintain a degree of democracy. Although even then, the 1% is pretty strong.
Yeah. So class warfare is a universal situation that's been going on for centuries and centuries. Can we ever do anything about reversing the direction that class warfare is carrying?
So we're looking
humanity
into the plastic glass, or I would say that, as I see it, a possible development may occur because we're talking about the global 1%.
Yes.
And even among the 1%, not everybody is likes all the other ones. There are always enemies even among
competition.
The 1%. It's not so much competition, I would say psychological dislike. so deep as to create a desire for hate. And that may be the avenue through which some of the power of the 1% may be disrupted. That would be my thought.
Is this a genetic given that there's going to be class differences and class competition?
You mean
in the human species?
Well, we'll start bring out genetics. Nobody really knows about it. It's a theory. It's a theory. It's a philosophy more than anything else. I would say that if the philosophy is imparted from childhood of a certain approach to life, then you would say in a 2 or 3 generation, you would say a different philosophy applied across the board.
I've been waiting all evening for a chance to challenge you. I think Darwin would quarrel with what you just said.
Who did?
Charles Darwin would suggest that it's more than a philosophy, it's a scientific fact.
No, economic Darwinism was not what Darwin said, and I think it would be too long here to go into discussion about Darwin and why the conclusions that have been drawn from Darwin are not necessarily the conclusion that the economists like to draw.
Of course.
In the sense that if there were no cooperation, if Darwinism would there would be very few creatures left on Earth. So there's always been, I would say, the cooperation has contributed more to the development of species than actual competition. But that would be another way of looking at it, and of course we don't have time here even to touch the problem. But if you go into even reading a little bit more of what Darwin wrote, he doesn't draw those conclusions. It is easy to draw those conclusions because we see it, because it is presented to us. This is it. There are no other options.
Well, it was survival of species, and let's not pursue that anymore because we're down to Oh, maybe you got about 5 or 6 more minutes and we can talk about stuff. What else shall we talk about those 5 or 6 minutes, Jimmy?
Well, the First World War is an interesting parallel, because interesting anniversary to talk about, at least as briefly as we can.
Sure.
For the reason that for one important reason, at least 2 or 3 actually. One is, as you know, is the time when for a moment I don't recall the words, the Sedition Acts was in power. Mm-hmm. And the fact that it was a Sedition Act implemented, not in power, implemented at the time is meaningful for a number of reasons. First of all, if you ask the average person, assuming that he or she remembers that World War I is not World War II.
The Alien and Sedition Act.
Excuse me, thank you. If you ask them about World War I, it says, who were the enemies? They would say, we don't know. Because Germany never attacked the United States, never had an intention of the United States. They had no colonies in the United States, like England that had, whatever, Jamaica at the time, all the Caribbeans. So there were no reasons for enmity between America and the United States, so between Germany and the United States. Yes. So it was necessary to create a mood, a quote-unquote public opinion, as to say they are bad, they are killing people, they are bad people. Number one. Number two, and that is also, I think, an interesting point to make, is that at the time, for reasons that are outside the scope of this conversation tonight, but Germany was the most socially advanced country in Europe, notwithstanding they had an emperor. And the reason why they were most advanced socially was the fact that they had implemented reforms, and there was a very strong socialist party.
Mm-hmm. Before it was captured by Adolf.
After the war, when of course everything broke loose and then everything else. So you had a country like the United States, who had no quote-unquote access to grind with Germany, who needed to go into war, and who implemented the Alien and Sedition Act, whereupon anybody who printed something against the war was likely to go to prison, which is
considered seditious.
Seditious, which is almost which are the reasons, the indirect reasons, or related to the reasons why today is still quote-unquote constitutional to tap the phones and the communications of everyone, and I mean everyone, to find out through the, as you know, through the metadata,
who is seditious,
or who did what to whom, or what they're planning to do, or what their thoughts are. So we have the combination in the 2 anniversary of World War I and Orwell. We have now the thought police, which is exactly the thought police. And not even Orwell, I think, he could have imagined at what level the control of the people could have reached, because of course at the time there were no chips, there were no computers, and there were no so.
Jump ahead 100 years, and what will be the next step in what we're talking about right now, as far as maintaining awareness of what the people are up to, so that the people in power can retain their power and their control and their mastery of all of humankind.
It's a really difficult problem, because you have, I would say, it's
you got about a minute.
insoluble at the moment.
Yes.
Because all the media from which the 90% of the people get information off is controlled by the powers that be.
Yes.
So that would be a number one. So when you have the media, the actual physical control of thought, and the only thing left is your program, or programs similar to yours, but yours is number one in this sense, and many other people who do the same thing, which at the moment is not much, but is much better than nothing.
In the Vietnam era, in the civil rights era, and women's suffrage era, it seemed impossible at the time.
No, but
there was a lot of people said it will never change, but we changed it.
No, they did, because they could have actual demonstrations. There were people who died in the civil rights movement. There were and plus there was also a fear of actual physical revolution, which now today you could not have anymore. Never. The control is too powerful. You know, have you ever watched the custodial industry, which is the show, and all these things to control they have things that are wonderful stuff. So
that's enough, Jimmy. Listen, look at that camera and tell our viewers one final thought you have for them. What message you have about what went on tonight, or anything else you want to say to them. This is your camera. Say something to them.
Let's hope for the best. Yeah. Hope is the last goddess. So it's the one to be quote unquote praying to, in the generic sense.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
I
Thank you for
appreciate
having
your
me.
being
Thank
here
you.
tonight again. Well, it looks like it's time for us to close now before Mr. E, my director, yells at me. So before we say goodnight, I want to say thank you to my wonderful crew and to Paul Wade, particularly for coming in and helping out, and everybody else, and the nurse. And you know my email address. Give me a jingle or email me about anything that you've seen tonight or anything we talked about. And to get my local broadcast schedule, go to my website and click on Present Day Activities, Public Service Announcement number 2. Get my shows on the web, go to www.donbaham.com and click on favorite links again. One more PSA. The ACE, American Civil Liberties Union, without the ACLU, our civil liberties would be totally in the tank. They only have in the tank now. And one more PSA, do we have one? Get my shows broadcast by other stations where you live. Ask your local public access station to go to pegmedia.org and follow the instructions there. And do we have anything else to say? Mr. E, public service announcements, ending corporate personhood. We got to take back our country, ending corporate personhood, go to move to amend. Amend the Constitution to say that corporations are not persons. And what else can we say? Thanks for watching. Thank you for watching the show. And remember, KFC, not Kentucky Fried Chicken, Dr. Don's KFC. Kind, friendly, and charitable. Be kind, be friendly, and be charitable to you too. And you too. And you too. And you. Thanks again for watching. See you next time. Have a good and prosperous 2014. Bye.